I'm Lindsay Graham, creator and executive producer of American Criminal, the podcast you're listening to. This week, we're celebrating two things: the 80th episode of our show, and of course, you, our loyal listeners who have helped us get to this point. And to show our appreciation, we put together an entire week of bonus episodes. Today, I'm here to give you a glimpse into the world we'll be entering on the latest season of the show, and in particular, a man who played a key role in defining the lasting legacy of the case we'll be exploring. But before we get into that, I have a favor to ask. Making a podcast like American Criminal takes a lot of hard work from our team, but making a podcast a success is down to you, our listeners. And I'll be frank, if we're going to continue bringing you this show, we need to reach a bigger audience. So please, will you help us? The very first thing you can do is make sure you're following the show in your podcast app. Just hit that follow button and then recommend the show to someone else. Word of mouth is still the very best tool we've got, so think about someone who might enjoy the show and then tell them about it. And of course, we'd love to hear what you think about the show, so give us a rating and leave a review because we read every single one. And finally, if you'd like to directly support the show and get something back, you can subscribe to American Criminal in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at AmericanCriminal.com. Subscribers get early access to all of our new seasons in their entirety, great for binging and all ad-free. Any one of these actions you can take right now, and they'd be a tremendous help to us. So let me thank you in advance for doing your part in keeping this show going. And there's no better time than right now, because our new series kicks off tomorrow, and it's one you won't want to miss. Every so often, a story comes along that's so scandalous, so attention-grabbing, that the media dubs it the crime of the century. You know the ones: the Lindbergh kidnapping, the Black Dahlia murder, the Son of Sam killings, the O.J. Simpson case. All of them were stories that stopped the nation, turned all eyes to a fixed point as some horrible truth about the American dream was exposed. But of the many crimes of the century, one set an early benchmark: the case of Leopold and Loeb. Theirs was an act that shocked the city of Chicago and riveted the nation: the murder of 14-year-old Bobby Franks. Just hours after his body was found, news of Bobby's slaying was splashed across Chicago's 6 newspapers, and the coverage only grew from there, and readers couldn't get enough. "Millionaire son kidnapped at school and slain," read one headline. Another screamed, "A crime story that reads like a melodrama." And when the killers were revealed just over a week later, the story drew even more eyeballs, because not only was Bobby Franks the son of a prominent, wealthy family, but both of his killers were too. The full story of Leopold and Loeb is going to be explored over the next 4 episodes of American Criminal beginning this week. It's a story that demanded the nation's attention, and even in Chicago, a city in the grip of nearly daily mob violence, no one could look away from the murder of Bobby Franks. Not only was the crime itself sensational, but the trial was sure to be one for the ages. Everyone wanted to know how these young killers could possibly explain their actions. And with a whole city screaming for blood, people started to ask who in their right mind would ever defend such loathed young men, because win or lose, that person's reputation might never recover from being associated with Leopold and Loeb. But there was one man who might be able to weather the storm, one of the greatest trial lawyers America had ever seen, Clarence Darrow. His unorthodox legal strategy changed the course of the case, making an already big story even bigger and making history at the same time. But even before his involvement in the Leopold and Loeb case, Darrow was seen as a heavyweight of his profession. Beginning his career as a lawyer for hire in small towns, Darrow slowly built his reputation as a riveting orator. He then moved to Chicago and found a job as a lawyer for the city and then as general attorney for the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. As a child, his father had taught him the value of debate, and he firmly believed there was good in speaking up for the underdogs. So when members of the American Railway Union went on strike in 1894, Darrow walked away from his own railway job to represent them. Over the following years, Darrow used his position to illuminate the poor working conditions faced by coal miners, as well as the vast amount of child labor propping up in the industry. It was this involvement with unions that first drew widespread attention to Darrow. But as his career moved into a new phase, he achieved even greater notoriety by courting controversy. On December 30th, 1905, Frank Steunenberg, the former governor of Idaho, was killed by a bomb rigged to the gate outside his home. Within days, the authorities had a suspect in custody. Harry Orchard confessed to the crime, telling investigators that he had been hired to carry out the assassination by leaders of the Western Federation of Miners, or WFM. Although Steuenberg had been elected with the support of union workers, he had sided with mine owners once he was in office and even called in federal troops to round up and imprison union members. So in 1905, with the national fight for workers' rights at a roiling boil, it was believable that union leaders would go after so vocal an enemy. And indeed, Harry Orchard explained that he had been involved in union-related bombings that had killed 17 other people over the years. After Orchard's confession, Idaho's authorities collaborated with law enforcement in Colorado to capture and extradite the 3 WFM leaders implicated in the crime. There were legal challenges raised over the way the men were forcibly brought to Idaho, but they were rejected by the courts. The nation was furious with the union's murderous tactics, and the violations of their civil liberties would not change public opinion. The case was going to trial, and it drew the attention of 49-year-old Clarence Darrow. On the surface, it was a murder trial, but to him it was also a struggle between embattled workers facing off against the greed and might of industrialists. Still, public opinion was not on the side of the union men, and all through the trial it looked like a losing case. Harry Orchard was a convincing witness, and although the defense did their best to undermine his credibility, momentum was certainly with the prosecution when both sides rested. But then Darrow stood to deliver an 11-hour closing argument. He attacked Harry Orchard's character, then pivoted, turning his speech into a cry for the poor, for the weak, for the weary, for that long line of men who in darkness and despair have borne the labors of the human race. This speech moved many in the gallery to tears. Juries acquitted first one defendant, then a second. After that, the state abandoned their case against the third. Clarence Darrow and his eloquent closing arguments had proved too compelling to ignore. But around the country, the conflict between unions and industrialists was only becoming more heated. 3 years later, in 1910, it would explode into violence again, and the unions would once more call on Clarence Darrow for help. Harrison Gray Otis was publisher of the Los Angeles Times. Fiercely anti-labor, he used his newspaper to push his agenda and help employers bust unions and lower wages throughout the city. Thanks to his efforts, union membership dwindled in Los Angeles, and leaders of the International Association of Bridge and Structural Iron Workers, or IW, feared that Otis would turn his attention to the heavily unionized San Francisco next. They decided they had to do something, and just after 1 a.m. on October 1st, 1910, a bomb exploded in the alley beside the 3-story Times building in downtown Los Angeles. 21 people died in the blast and ensuing fire, employees who were working late to put out an extra edition of the paper the following afternoon. Investigators hunted for the culprits for months, and finally, in April of 1911, brothers John and James McNamara were arrested for planning and executing the bombing. Unions quickly organized behind the McNamaras, believing them when they protested their innocence. Rallies and parades were held to drum up support, and workers across the country donated to a huge defense fund. A good portion of that money would go to Clarence Darrow, who was once again summoned to fight for unionists accused of murder. But things were different this time. When Darrow arrived in Los Angeles to take the case, he quickly realized the McNamaras were guilty as charged. So with a jury seated, but arguments still to begin, he went to the brothers and convinced them that it would be best to plead guilty in exchange for lighter sentences. It was either that or face the death penalty. The brothers took the deal, and Clarence Darrow had saved their lives, but it had come at a cost. Once a hero to the union movement, Darrow now found himself a pariah. In the eyes of many workers, he'd taken the hard-earned money of unionists to defend John and James McNamara and then given up without a fight. People felt betrayed and suspicious. Following the case, Darrow was accused of bribing one of the jurors and forced to stand trial for 2 separate bribery charges. He was acquitted at the first, and the second resulted in a hung jury. But though his name was cleared, his reputation had taken a beating. Darrow suddenly found his career in decline, and for the next decade he had to focus his attention on less high-profile cases for individual clients. By the time the 1920s arrived, he was well into his 60s and beginning to think about winding down. He'd had a long and storied career, including 2 cases that made national headlines, but they were long ago. Still, Darrow's story was far from over, and beginning in 1924, his battered reputation would be rebuilt into a towering legacy. One after another, he would take on, shape, and define cases that held America riveted. His words were run in every paper, his marathon closing arguments becoming the stuff of legend. But Darrow's rehabilitation, his ascendance to the pantheon of American jurists, might never have happened if it weren't for one case. Thanks to a family connection, in 1924, Darrow was asked to defend cold-blooded killers Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb. By the time he agreed to join the defense, the murder of young Bobby Franks had all of Chicago up in arms, and people across the nation were waiting with bated breath to see what would happen at trial. Darrow had helped more than one accused killer escape the gallows, but never anyone who was so thoroughly hated as Leopold and Loeb. There were whispers that maybe the lawyer of the century had bitten off more than he could chew with this case, but what he did next surprised them all. You'll hear all about Clarence Darrow's role in this captivating case when American Criminal Leopold and Loeb begins tomorrow. Be sure to follow American Criminal wherever you're listening now.
This episode may contain reenactments or dramatized details. And while in some cases we can't know exactly what happened, all our dramatizations are based on historical research. American Criminal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Jeremy Schwartz. Audio editing by Mohammed Shazid. Sound design by Matthew Filler. Music by Thrum. This episode is written and researched by Joel Callan. Managing producer Emily Burke. Executive producers are Joel Callan, William Simpson, and Lindsay Graham.